currently working at Foodpanda, and we had the good fortune of she having worked with us in Lazada in the past. She has worked in various markets, including the US, China, and Singapore. And while doing so, she has had the opportunity to immerse herself in diverse cultures and to design for global audience. And that is where her today's topic leads to, that is design beyond borders. Over to you, Chong.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and also thank you so much for inviting me to the talk. I was very flattered when I got the invitation. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of other faces here. I'm happy to meet everyone again, and also to share my experience. So maybe I can share my screen as well. 1 second, let me share my screen. I think this is the desktop that I want to share.
Yes, you can share, Chong.
Okay, let me try it. So can everyone see the screen? Oh, wait, sorry. Maybe this is...
You can share your screen.
It's good?
Yeah, if you can make it a full screen.
Is it full screen? It's not?
It is not full screen. No.
Okay, let me see this. This one?
Yes. Okay.
Cool. Okay. So the topic that I'm going to talk about is design beyond borders, navigating localization and cultural differences. Before I start, I'll just give a little bit more introduction about myself, my experience. So I was born in Wuhan, China. And when I was about like 18 to 19 years old, I went to the States for study. And after the graduation, I went to Bay Area for work. So the total years that I was staying in the States was about like 9 years. And then in 2018, I went back to China. I first landed at Shanghai, and then I moved to Shenzhen, where I kind of work in Lazada. And then now I come to Singapore. I've been in Singapore for 2 years, and I've been in Foodpanda also in more than 2 years. So yeah, that's kind of my whole journey across kind of different cultures and different places. And then we are back to the topics that we are going to talk about today. So today we're going to talk about culture and product design. And then there are like 3 major topics that I want to cover. The first one is, what is culture? How does culture impact design? And what challenges are we facing? So the first one, what is culture? Actually, this is a very, very hard question that has been studied in anthropology for hundreds of years. There are many, many different sayings. The total way of life of people, the social legacy the individual acquires from his group, a way of thinking, feeling, and believing, an abstraction from behavior, a mechanism for the normative regulation of behavior. So there are like many, many other more different definitions. Basically, in this kind of academic area, there's no one definition. So what does that mean for us? What we kind of really focus on is more about like human-computer interaction. And the areas that we just want to talk more about is shared value, communication style, and group behavior. So today's talk and also some examples and the practice are also around these 3 areas. And then still around some basic theory about culture, there's a one model that has been widely used in the industry, which is called Hofstede 6 dimensions. And I also believe in early, when I was in Lazada, there was a research also based on these dimensions. So a quick overview of these dimensions, if you are not very familiar with them. So the first one is called power distance, which means if the culture get a very high score, it means the country expect and accept that the power can be distributed unequally. The second one is individualism. If the culture get a high score, it means people tend to look after themselves and their own families. And in the opposite way, which is called the collectivism, which means people regard themselves as a group. They put themselves in groups. The third one also means like the society will be driven by competition, achievement, and success. And if it's got a low score, it means society is more like caring for others and equality and quality of life. And then uncertainty avoidance is basically a culture feel threatened by ambiguous or unknown. And then they trying to address some rules to like kind of erase this uncertainty. And then for the long term, they kind of encourage efforts in modern education as a way like to prepare for the future. So they're really looking into more like long-term plans. And the last one, indulgence, is more about how the culture control their desires and empowers. So if you got a low score, it means more restraints in this culture. So in general, they are like good reference, and I may take maybe the second one as an example how it can be used in kind of assumptions in our product. So the example is more about individualism, which is kind of highly associated with the social proof. So on the left, where we see the Chinese food delivery app called Meituan, which has a lot of very heavy social proofs along the whole journey. Of course, they have rating and reviews. They also have like quotes from other users. They are showing percentage of likes, number of sales per month, and there's many other more stuff. For example, like short videos and live streaming. They are all addressed like to recommend food to other people. However, where we see some other apps, like for example, Uber Eats, mostly in European and North American markets, they are more kind of median social proof. They have the ratings, and then they have this text about the most liked, and that's it. And for Bolt, which is a food delivery app in European markets, they only have more like the rating, and that's kind of everything. So one hypothesis can be raised from this observation is that the European or North American countries have higher scores in individualism, so they need less information from other people, and then kind of order food based on their own perspectives. So this is just one example of using the dimension for this some like product assumptions, but of course there are like many more usages. And also I link the website in the deck if you are interested to learn more about this. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So as we just have a peek at how culture difference shape the product, now we will look into like more practices. Before I start like talking about like more like detailed examples, first of all, I'd like to introduce this model, which is called the Asperg Model. So the culture that we can observe in a daily basis is only 10% on the surface. And beneath of it, there are many more things like unspoken rules and unconscious rules. And the following examples that we'll show also reflect some of this structure. So the first thing is quite obvious, which is the language. It's just very obvious that you can tell from how the language itself look can be very different regarding of the size, the length, or even the reading orders. So for example, like here, I have examples of like Chinese and English. They have the same meaning and they are also like be set at the same size. But what we see here is like Chinese after translation is much shorter. But however, on the denser or the height, it can look like denser. And on the right, there's another example. This is from a Persian app, of Persian food delivery app, and you can see all the all the interactions is opposite from us, and all the languages reading from the right to left. So yeah, this is really quite an interesting case. So though it may be not very obvious when we observe like one single word, but when we put all of them together on a big page, there could be more differences, especially visually. Here's my work at Foodpanda for corporate admin portal. Well, you can see on the right is the Chinese version, on the left is the English version. The Chinese version may look slightly more spatial just due to after translation, all the sentences become shorter. However, well, you can observe the title becomes denser. It's just because the characteristics of the word itself, they have a lot of strokes, and when it's bold, it just all squeezed together. So there are like certain subtle visual differences, but also we observe there's no big issues in usability regarding of the changes between languages in this case. And then actually the next example I want to brought up is actually from my work in Lazada back to 2010 for Seller Center's home screen. I don't know how it looks like now, but I mean, this is just like 2010. So this was the first revamp that I did for Lazada, and the English, like when you, sorry, I cannot find the Chinese version, but when you observe the English version, actually looks quite information heavy. There's a lot of data around, and sometimes the text can be super long. However, after the release, I did get some feedback from our Chinese users saying the page looks very blank. So there, of course, there are like many reasons behind of it, but one of the potential reasons is that when it's translated to Chinese, all the text become much shorter, and the overall page looks quite spatial. Yep. And then let's move on to next one. It's also around the language, but they are like less, it's more like less obvious stuff. So which can be typing. So when we type in English, our system, the usually computer system, is able to autofill the rest once you just start one letter. For example, I just have two letters, it can almost finish the rest of some words. However, in Chinese, even you like type like 4 letters, it still cannot identify which word that you want to use. So there's more effort regarding like the typing in Chinese, and when this become like a searching behaviors, there's just a little bit more complex than English. This also could be one of the reasons that when we really need to input the address, a lot of Chinese apps ask users to select the province and the cities first, and then the address. But of course, this also involves some conventions of the address order. Usually English from the small arrow to large arrow, and Chinese is from the large place to small place. Yeah, there are like multiple country attributes that cause different interactions from the English and Chinese versions. And then move on, we want to talk more about some unconscious rules behind the language. And I really want to introduce this lady who is my role model. She's a professor from University of California, San Diego. And her studies is mainly about how language shaped the way we think about time. Oh, and I forgot to mention, she's actually in the domain of cognitive science. So there's a lot of language and perception. So the studies is, the conclusions from the study is the Mandarin speakers were more likely to think about time vertically versus English speakers were more likely to think about time horizontally. So how she kind of find out this kind of subtle difference? Well, she started with like the language itself. So both English and Mandarin use before and after to describe time. For example, before lunch, after lunch. And in Mandarin, which is 午饭前,午饭后. So we use this certain before and after to describe the time. However, there's another layer for Mandarin. We also use up and down to describe time, which is kind of mirror to 上 and 下. The examples is like 上周,下周, which is more like previous week and next week, and it's more like up week, down week. So there's another concept about like top and down in Chinese, and this may be the reason when this come to think about time, people also think about the vertical direction in Mandarin. What does this mean? This may be some good insights or very interesting point when we think about the defining for something like timeline. Should it be horizontal or should it be vertical? Yeah, and that is more about the language. And of course, when we talk about the design, the other very, very important elements must be the visual part. Obviously, every culture get their own symbols to show some like very similar concept. For example, for most Western countries, they can use this kind of percentage or this tag look like symbols to show as offers, the concept of offers. Versus in some Chinese apps, there's a concept of like red packets. So in traditions, in weddings or like big festivals like spring festivals, we give the red packet to people, and usually there's quite an amount of fortune inside. Yeah, and then that's in the real life, that kind of concepts be brought up into the digital world, and well, we use this kind of red packet or 红包 as a concept for a lot of offers and promotions. So speaking of the red, then we must talk about colors. So of course, we all know this concept, the color can be used very differently in different cultures. And here's an example from Apple stock, exactly the same app, but one is in China and one is in the US. If you observe closely, you may find out how they use the red in Chinese version. Well, if it's increasing, then it's red. If it's decreasing, it's green. However, in the US app, it's totally opposite. So the green is increasing and the red is decreasing. This also have the cultural background. Well, the red is associated, when red is associated with money, it's usually represent fortune in Chinese culture. And then actually, there are more subtle things regarding of the aesthetic preference. There's a research from University of Washington. They have this big data from 44 countries, and they examine 200 websites for each countries. They kind of study like a lot of dimensions, and one of them is the saturation of the website. And you may see it's not just Eastern or versus Western. We see there's a lot of different countries, and people have very different preference in these 44 countries. maybe sometimes when we look into those websites, we don't even know that we have such preference. Yep. And so move on. The next one is also the topic I find out that has been the interest of many people. This has been widely discussed on the internet. If you go to YouTube, you're probably going to see a couple of videos talking about this thing, which is the information intensity compared with the Eastern Asian culture app versus Western apps. Here, like some examples of the Uber and also the Chinese rider app, which is Didi. They actually have almost exactly functions on the home screen. They have the address, they have entry points for verticals. They also have this advertisements. But the way how they present and the complexity, the use of a color are very different. Also, I don't want to restrict the discussion only between the two areas. They are also from the same studies I mentioned before. All of the countries have their own preference regarding of the complexity of the information presentation. And also there's one very interesting statement carried from this study, which they were talking about. I think they kind of take some studies in Russian. So Russian websites, so this is just direct quote from the paper. So Russian websites are among the highest visual complexity, but the Russian users actually prefer simple websites. I would like to say this is not just for the questions carried from this paper. In my own experience, I've been asked by people about questions for many Chinese digital products as well. And this is actually the topic I will talk more about for the next section of the talk, which is the challenging section. So the challenging, what kind of challenges are we facing? So I have so many diagrams. Yeah, there's another one. This is also from the same guy who have the 6 dimensions to measure culture, Hofstede. He also have these studies about the placement of a culture. So he placed the culture between human nature and personality. Where the human nature is more like universal and inherited. Culture is more specific to a group, a category, and it's learned. And then for personality, it's specific to more like individual, and it's also and it's inherited and also learned. Why do I mention about this? Yeah, I just find it's very interesting that it's actually mirrored the stages how we develop a product. In general, there are like kind of 3 basic stages. Of course, they can be overlapped a little bit, but in general, there are like 3 steps. First, they usually do internationalization. Well, people remove all cultural elements, or they just build a product that can be easily modified. And then they push for localization, well, it's meet the requirements or user needs for a specific culture. And then the last stage is more like customization. So make the product more flexible to be adapted to the product to one specific group of users. Yep. So because of this, like some different stages was carried out some challenges, some questions for us. So the first one is more around, should we do internationalization or localization? As the human interaction design has been there for decades. There are a lot of very standardized principles around here. And this is a question that which standards that we should follow and which ones that we can modify to fit into the cultural needs. And actually, I also have an example from my early work in Lazada. So I did the design for the seller sign up flow, which is on the right corner. This is the old one. The orange is the old one. So all the information is like just on one screen. Users basically to fill out everything, then they can go to the next step. However, when we trying to redesign the whole flow, we noticed that Southeastern Asian sellers, they are still growing. They are still learning to run the business. And also we noticed that a lot of them are very used to platforms such as Shopify and Amazon. So we decided to make the design more closer to like a Western preference, that we break one big chunk of information to small bites. So we break one step to 3 steps, but each step has less information. Of course, we also tested this with some local sellers to make sure this works well for them. And after the release, the overall tax success rate was raised by 20%. So it was quite good. Yeah, and I had a great time working with the team at that moment for this project. And then for the next one, which leads to the second challenge, which is more about conversation between the localization or customization. Nowadays, what we observe in the world is the world witnessed an unprecedented influx of migrants ever happening in the history. This is like the most numbers ever. And there's a data also is more about like around 3.6% of the population on migration. And when we move around, we bring different cultures to new places, and this can cause a lot of users have mixed cultural background. And then this raises the problem, how we can solve this kind of problems. Should we do localization or should we do customization? Yeah, this is also a very small project. The project is not very small, but the feature, the thing that I want to talk about is quite small. This was what I did for Foodpanda Corporate. The thing I want to highlight is more about the time format. It's quite small and it's also very straightforward solution. So the situation was when developers started developing this feature, they asked me what is the time format that we should use. We have like so many markets. We have Southeastern Asian, and we also have European markets. So then at first I was thinking, okay, the answer is very simple. We just customize the time based on different countries, what the convention they use usually. However, when we discuss in the team, I asked the developers what the time format they are using in their phone. And the thing is like all of us are in Singapore, but we all have different time or date formats in our phone. So this is really just reminds me of, okay, now this is the point we cannot just do localization. We need to customize the time format based on individuals. And the solution is also quite simple. We just customize the time format based on user devices. So no matter what your operational system is, it's just going to directly reflect on the app about the time format. So no matter you are 12 hours or 24 hours, it's just going to follow your phone. Yeah, that was a very small one, but of course, there are like a lot of more advanced customizations. And this is a study from, this is a very interesting study, actually. They made this rough prototype to automatically generate the web layout based on users' past living places. For example, they asked users, where do you live for like past 10 years? How long you live? So they just gather those kind of information, and based on some culture dimensions, like what we mentioned before, they calculate a score, and then based on the score, they reflect the customized layouts based on the assumed preference. Some all the information the same. It's just the difference between the layouts. Some are more like information, the information is less dense, and some are more denser based on users' cultural background and where they live in the past, or the past experience. Yeah, and of course, in the industry, nowadays, people are also trying to modularize a lot of sections and to make each section can be moved easily and fit into different market needs. And then speaking of like mixed culture, what is really interesting is about the uniqueness of Singapore. What I really observe is such a diverse culture, and there are a lot of immigrants. Well, it can lead to a very different approaches to products. Personally, I kind of really appreciate the design for Grab. It's achieved such a good balance. We can see like a certain complexity of a super app, but also the overall navigation and infrastructure also relatively simpler. So there are actually a lot of potentials in this market, and it's very exciting to see how Singapore shapes its own style of products. Yeah, and as we talked a lot about the challenges of development stages, now we kind of want to focus more on ourselves. We usually pay so much attention to our users, but what about ourselves, our bias, and our privilege? So Donna Haraway is an anthropologist who studies about feminism, culture, and technology. Actually, I couldn't find the original quotes, but I found this second-hand quote from this TED Talk, which is also very amazing. You should look at. So I just read out the quotes. We are limited by who we are and where we are, and it's very easy to privilege our own point of view. To explain more about this, actually, I want to talk more about my story. So when I went back to China in 2018, that was the first time I went back in 5 years. I basically knew nothing about the markets or about the industry in China. I didn't even know how to buy food in the airport. So when I saw the app, I found that they are very complicated. I didn't know where to start, what to look at. And here you can see the example. This is the app that my mom usually uses. There's a lot of images, a lot of like labels and numbers. Versus the website that I usually use just an image and 2 buttons, and that's it. And this is not just like this. When it comes to promotions, it just confuses me more. Maybe you don't read Chinese, but please focus on this formula. It's incredibly complicated. It's like a math exam. I really cannot figure out like the exactly discount that I will get. However, compared to the app that I usually use, it's just one number telling me, okay, this is a discount and that's it. Actually, at that moment, everything seems to be very against all design principles that I learned. I believe they're just like purely bad designs in my eyes. Also, I asked my mom, like, what's her opinion? She also said it's actually, she also complained about exactly the same thing. She also complained about navigation. She also complained about like, she don't know how to find things. And at this point, I really want to talk about, well, I trying to figure out the reason behind all of this. I learned a lot from my coworkers in Lazada and friends in China, and I also read some online journals. So this is just what I learned, and based on my own limited knowledge, of course, there are many, many more factors contribute to the result of very complex interface and product mechanism. Yeah, I'll just give a very quick kind of brief explanation. So some of the reasons may due to like the huge population is can lead to a very competitive markets. The product does not just compete with other competitor companies, but each vertical inside the product also compete with each other. This could be one of the reasons that why all the entry points are super shiny, animated, trying to catch people's attention. And other factors such as income gap may also lead to different social values, and also they lead to different user needs. Some users use money to buy time, and some users use time to save money. This could be the reason for many different types of discounts and layers of promotions. But of course, many of you working in Lazada, you may know more about e-commerce than me. But definitely many other cultural and social factors contribute to the final results of this complexity of interface and product mechanism. And of course, there are some, I just briefly mentioned about like other elements. One of them is more about we as creators, what do we see in a daily life? So this is on the left is the electronic mall in Shenzhen. Actually, what we see can somehow reflect to what we make. Well, you can compare with the digital products. There are like some similarity. Well, there's a lot of call outs, a lot of promotions. However, there's on the other hand, well, I also have an example of the on the left is the electronic mall in the North America. And you also can see the overall vibe, the overall kind of feelings quite similar to the digital products that they make. However, the thing is like we are not just restricted to what we see every day. It also can be what we hear and what we feel in a daily life. We all know the civil rights movement has been in the States for a long time. And in recent years, there's a lot of inclusive designs and products are created, and they're mostly started from the US. So one of the example is actually from Google. It's called a Real Tone. It's a Google Pixel. Many people from different communities were involved in this in the development of this product and to achieve a common goal, which is they want to develop a phone camera to make all different skin tones looks great. Maybe you didn't notice, like in the past, the phone camera really just focus on one skin tone, and then they ignore like the colors of other kinds. And then this is one of the projects they bring up for the inclusiveness design. So to sum up a little bit, the things we create kind of shaped us just as much as we shape them. The relationship between humans, artifacts, and also culture is like a two-way streets that forms our identities and the culture fabric that continues to construct us. There are many times when I do my work, I keep thinking whether my decision is based on my own privilege or not. Maybe sometimes it's not a bad thing, but I usually believe it's always good to hear more voices from others, like your local users and also your local coworkers. It's always good to host some like workshops with them. Yeah, just to finish everything up in another quote from Donald Haraway. Technology is not neutral. We are inside of what we make, and it's inside of us. And yeah, that is everything from me. Thank you so much. Okay, should I open for questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chong. And we already have a few questions. And anyone else who wants to ask any question to Chong, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can post it on the chat and I will read it out to Chong. So we already have a few questions. First one is from Shruti, and she is asking, what's the reason that the UX is generally visually complex in Russia, even though users don't prefer it?
I don't know if I answer that question later, but through a Chinese version. Do you need more explanations for that?
Hi, Chong, it's me.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was wondering, you mentioned that users don't prefer it, right? And that's what got me curious. So how did people find out that users don't prefer it and yet people make it? You know, I think that was a gap for me that I could not get. Could you elaborate?
Yeah. So what I observed, like when we do user test, and when we is more like a point of time. So we ask the users their preference. We ask the users about their thinkings about this. So they will, of course, the aesthetic part can be different from the actual product. They may bring up, oh, I prefer the clean look. This is so complex. However, the product development is not just today. All the product has been there at least now, except for startup, but for the most of the apps that we are using now has like 10 years history, and they are embedded so many economy markets, all this history stuff behind it. And what we observe, especially in the Chinese market, they are keeping this also be shaped by the market needs. Well, they keep adding the feature on the top of the original feature, and they're also trying to compete with each other to trying to have more features on it. In aspect, the product has been already shaped like this, and it's just very hard to balance what is actually the products have been formed versus this one time, not one time, but this time points of user feedback. And also we observe what is happening is like in China, everyone uses the same thing. They don't know what is outside. They don't know how it can be look like. Well, that's also restricted the perspective. Sometimes they just feel, okay, I will still use it. It won't stop me from using it.
Yeah, actually, when you were speaking, I got reminded of the previous slide that you said about the language and how from English to Chinese, it was translated and users gave feedback that it looks too empty, right? Yeah, the previous, like the design part of it. I was wondering, just a thought to share with the group. Could it be that they're used to seeing things so visually complex, and that is why they think this is too empty?
Yes, so that's also very, yes, thank you. Yes, that's also a very good point. So actually that happened to this project. So at beginning, when they first see it, it's very different from what they originally see. So they say it's very blank because they are not used to it. That's one of the reasons on top of the language translation stuff. And then after 2 weeks, actually the operator told me they're actually quite used to it now. It's not really a problem. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chong, and the examples were very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
The next question is from Wei Wei, and she is asking, what is the main reason for breaking the Lazada seller sign-up page into 3 steps? And is that considered internationalization or localization?
Okay, that's also a very good question. Let me orientate. Wait, I cannot remember which slide it's about. Oh, sorry, I cannot remember which slide it is. But also let me just answer that question first. So the internationalization or localization is also very knowledge based. That depends on more like which perspective you are thinking. So if I'm like for example, if my perspective is more like in Chinese version, I may think I'm what I'm doing to have all the information on one screen is internationalization, because this is more like it's more like what I usually do. But however, in the other perspective, it's maybe the opposite way. So I would like to say for that example, it's more like a decisions. Should we do move away from like the traditions embedded in the current situation and to trying to localize it based on the market. And also the reason behind it is we observe the sellers are very different from Chinese sellers. Chinese sellers are very mature. And also they are very used to this very heavy information structure. However, the Southeast Asian sellers, they are still learning, they are growing, and they used to use like Shopify and also Amazon, which is have more like the Western look apps. So that's why we decide to try to break it to 3 steps. It's more like the way it has like less information and let them digest one by one. Yeah, I hope that I answer your question.
Thanks, Chong. Yeah, it's me. Maybe I would just follow up a little bit, because the reason why I asked this question is, I think on the slide you were talking about the challenges, and you're saying one of the challenge is internationalization or localization. And I think that's a really great topic. I'm very interested about this. For instance, let's say Sephora, right? Like they also have e-commerce platform. So let's say Sephora, they want to do a revamp of their website. So I think internal talking about, should I offer like one kind of universal version across different markets? Or I offer a localized version for each market. So maybe one version for China, and another version for Vietnam, etc. So when you approach this kind of question, like whether internationalization or localization, what would be the considerations behind?
Okay, I mean, only can answer this from my own experience. So basically, there are going to be a lot of input from the research, and the research may form some assumptions that we think this kind of culture group, they have like a huge pain point in the current state, and then we need to move to another direction based on those insights. But that's just like how this happened to me when I encountered this situation. But maybe I believe there are like some other situations. Yeah.
I see. So you're basically basing it on whatever research that's done.
Yeah, the research is also not individually user research. Sometimes it's accumulated knowledge from a lot of aspects. Sometimes it's more about marketing research, the different insights from different people. Yeah.
Understand. Cool. Thank you.
So next question is from Arklo, and it's like very similar to what Uiwei asked. And it's also about internationalization and localization. And what's the consideration? He is asking if it is mainly by profit scales or other business or design reasons.
Also, this is a really great question, and I also feel that I may not be able to answer because it's really involves a lot of business decisions, because this involves the budget and all the stuff. But yeah, I think it's just as a lot of things. There's a lot of factors behind it. And I'm very sorry for this question. I may not be able to give like very precise answers for it. Yeah.
So moving on, the next question is from Alif Daniel Noor, and he's asking, is there any difference in language style and tone used in markets that are focused on individualism and vis-a-vis collectivism?
Oh, okay. In terms of UX writing, I hope my the UX writing in my company can be here, but also I'm not an expert of UX writing, but I believe, like in my company, what I've heard, like each company has the branding tone for the UX writing. So the branding tone also can be very different from markets to markets. Like in my company, the European has different branding, so the overall tone and objectives are also different. Usually the branding team, they will the local branding team, they will form this kind of their own kind of branding or the style, including visual and also the language that they're using. But yeah, this may also embed in the individualism and collectivism, but I don't really have like a concrete examples here. Yeah.
Next question is from Silue, and she is asking, or rather, she is first starts with congratulating you, saying that it's a very interesting topic and presenting amazing information. And then she goes on to say that I'm also faced with the same challenges since our company covers the markets around the world. It's not possible to customize according to user habits, information density in each market. My question is how you increase the scalability of design for different markets with their preference and user needs in mind.
Okay. Also, I would like to say this idea is not just from me, but from many product designers that I met. They have kind of very similar strategy. But it's not really restricted to product designs. Also need a lot of help from tech and product managers. So basically, the overall strategy is like we are trying to modularize all the information to chunks. Of course, visually it looks like a section of this certain of information. But also on the back end of the technology, they also try to package those information together. So when it comes to each market, we basically move those modules around. Sometimes, like in a lot of cases, it's actually customized by the local team. They try to get some market insights and move around those modules, try to fit which one goes first, and this is the module that they want to have the user see first. Yeah, that's maybe the thing that I usually see that I see most time. Yeah. But if you want to do like a scalability on the level of like, for example, like Chinese, the navigation of Chinese food delivery app is like left and right, and then you want to change the whole thing to top and down, that can be a challenge for now. And I believe a lot of schools, universities also have a lot of studies about that, trying to make it totally movable. But I haven't seen like the low cost development for that part.
Thank you. I would like to make it more concrete. The situation is gonna be like maybe from Southeast Asia. The case is like users prefer this, like maybe more then the information density is also different, but for European countries, like they prefer another thing. So then but you know, like we cannot customize for every situation. So it's like how you usually deal with such how do you usually balance this conflict?
Actually, I've never like encountered. I don't know if how extreme the case is. But usually if we have a lot of this also relates to a lot of like high level product strategies. You need to be aligned with a lot of stakeholders to make decisions. So yeah, I think it's not just a design single player here.
Yeah, thank you.
Shruti is back with another question, and she is asking, what's the design process you follow when you are designing localization for a new country? How do you get nuanced design preferences of each country?
a new country. Again, I would like to say this also not just like one person player here. This also we need a lot of business strategies about how much we want to emphasize on this new country, and also how different these new countries can be from our like overall like design. Of course, the insights from the markets, from the user research, a lot of stuff. But yeah, and we usually get a result, and we kind of evaluate also regarding of the overall product strategies to decide like which part we would like to. We are able to kind of many of times it's like we are able to do like some localizations, and which stage of the product development that we should start localizations. Yeah, there's just a lot of decisions are not just on my area, and I basically need to talk to a lot of stakeholders about this. Yeah.
We just now got another question from Art Clue, and he's asking, would love to know how would you make impact to strategic level, for example, roadmaps and project management as a designer if there is gray areas for localization scopes?
Okay, that's a very great question, because I'm really I think the reason I chose this topic, one of the reasons is like I kind of want to start with this, yeah, this has not really been addressed in my kind of a lot of like my past experience, but I just push a little bit here and there while I do the daily design. But yeah, this is a really good question. I kind of want to start it in a more as you said, a strategic way. But this also kind of related to a lot of other topics that's kind of the product, the goal of the product team, and also the stages of the product itself. For example, like in the current stage, like in the previous stage, sometimes if the product is very early, we really just focus on the internationalization. And I think for later stage, like my current project, we are seeing these differences, the very big different behaviors from European countries and also the Southeast Asian countries. So then we started looking into why this happened. So basically just wait for the stages when it's coming, when it's a point that everyone think this is the best time, and this is the way that we should do it, then it will happen. At least for my experience, like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Chong, this session is also live streamed to Bing Live, so some of your former Lazada colleagues also give their reactions. Let me.
Oh, I saw the flowers.
Dennis said hi. Definitely sent flowers. George was so exciting, giving love and claps.
Oh, thank you so much.
Zoe said you need to call her, Zoe.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. And a very delayed happy birthday to George. Yeah. Thank you, guys. So anything else?
Is there any more questions?
So no more questions here. Let me check once again. No more questions here. So yeah, we can end the session then. Thanks again, Chong, for a wonderful session. And thanks everyone for joining.
Okay.
We'll see you for the next Brain Food session. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Chong.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Everyone.
Bye.